Regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee is July the 6th. We have a quorum, Mr. Weezer, Mr. Smith, myself, Bernard Parks as chair. What we'd like to do is go through the agenda and so that we can get rid of the consent items. And what we'd also like to do is hear the two commissioners before we go in closed session so that they're not sitting around. So, colleagues, on number 4, if you have no specific questions as to cases, we can move that on consent as a routine report.
Good here.
Okay, we note and file that. We'd like to ask the clerk to get with the city attorney and to give us a added update as of June 30th, 2009. And we'd like to renew our request, as we've done on the prior report, of adding additional short synopsis to each case so we're aware of what those circumstances are. I'd also like to go consent on number 7 with some instruction. We'd like to note and file that report, but instruct the city attorney and the CAO to complete appropriate instructions to the controller to close out the tax reform fund. I'd also ask the clerk to give an explanation of what that fund is and what amount of money is in that fund as they close it out. It appears that from our records it was an ordinance repealed it as of 12/31/08. Also, I'd like to add an instruction and ask the controller, I think a year or two ago, the committee asked for the controller and the CAO to do an evaluation of the 1,000 special funds that existed in the city and to make some recommendations as to those that should be closed and those should be continued. So we can move 7 on note and file. Would also ask a consent on number 8, that we approve the CAO's recommendations. Okay with that? Move that one. On number 13, move that on note and file Department of Aging report as far as information purposes. And let me just ask, and this is my office and the CLA, for this report was done 9/2008. The request was 9/2008. They replied October 2008, yet we've scheduled it almost a year later in 2009. We need to find out why that's taken so long to get it before the committee. That's 13. Number 16, we approved the...
I got some questions on that one.
On that one, we'll hold 16. Let's see, number 18. And that's a waiver, conflict waiver. Move that on consent. Approve the city attorney's report. Number 19. We approve the Office of Finance recommendation and also instruct Finance to report to Budget and Finance with recommendations for eliminating the city's financial liability for interest payments in cases where the initial overpayment of business taxes were clearly the fault of the business and not the city. So if there's a legal prohibition on that, we need to know that. That's number 19. Number 20, recommend that we note and file the police department's response to mid-year. Any questions on that one? And also to ask the clerk to get with the police department to give us the most updated information as of June 30th on the amount of unreimbursed, of reimbursable overtime, what the final figure was at the end of the fiscal year. And then number 22, receive and file, as this was dealt with in the budget. So, okay, we could move those. Okay. Those remaining, we could start with number 5 for the, and 6, and bring the two commissioners up. We can deal with them together.
Item number 5 is consideration of the mayor's appointment of Ms. Roberta Conroy to the Board of Los Angeles City Employees Retirement System.
20, 18, 19, 20, and 22.
Thank you. Do we also, 6?
Okay. Item 6 is consideration of the mayor's appointment of Mr. Adlai Wertman to the Board of Fire and Police Pension Commissioners.
Oh, just hold on on Bill, on number 13, you asked for that. Now, we dealt with it on consent. If you don't have any question. Oh, yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Okay, we can hold 13 for Mr. Rosenthal. That was a request of his, so that we will not go on consent on that one. Okay, thank you for that. All right. We have 5 and 6.
I will say this, since we're flipping pages, that Adlai Workman, who's for the Board of Fire and Police Pension Commissioners, is a great leader in the 11th District and created and played a major role in Chrysalis, which is a job program, and did a fantastic job in leadership on that and a lot of other things he's done. So when I saw that he was being appointed, I was thrilled, and that's just an expression from somebody that knows somebody that has worked with them. Sidebar.
Adelaide, I just want you to know that's 3-1 now.
I'm not sure if it was good or bad, but I'll...
Ms. Conroy, why don't we start off with you, and you could give us some idea of your appointment to the LACER Board, what your expectations are, what your experience is, and how will you best serve that board?
Well, I like to start any situation with no expectation, and I'm never a loser, so I can't really say, because being a new person, I do have some idea of what it might look like, but I think that as far as my experience, that I would, I think I'm really an ideal candidate in the sense that I have a history of community service. I have a law degree, and I have been in the investment management business since the early 80s until I retired almost 6 years ago. So I've been navigating these waters of investments for a very, very long time, primarily on the business side, not at all as a portfolio manager. However, most of my day-to-day contact was with the portfolio folks.
Let me ask you so you're retired now?
Yes, I retired almost 6 years ago.
Okay. And being retired, you're not involved in the investment business at all?
None whatsoever. I do have, and it's on my Form 700, I do have an equity ownership in the parent company of one of the investment managers to LACERS. We've had a capital group, Capital Guardian Trust Company, and they have managed a $300 million a European equity account since 1992, and I understand from Sally Choi today that that contract was renewed for 3 years, I think last month. So there should be no upcoming issue before the LACERS board that is going to be during the period I own my stock, which will all be sold in January 2010. So after January 2010, I'll have no interest in that particular relationship.
Could you give us a little synopsis of what you did with the Capital Group companies?
Yes, I was involved primarily in the institutional account management side of the business. If you're familiar with the Capital Group, they're basically have two sides of the business, institutional and then the publicly traded mutual fund side, the American funds. The institutional side is probably now about 20% of their business. At one point during my career, since it was a long career, it was bigger than the mutual fund business. But it was mostly institutional, and then within that particular responsibility, I was on the executive committee and the board of the institutional account management companies, both U.S. and non-U.S., and where it got interesting and where I spent a lot of my time was in emerging markets, because we, I think, still are the largest manager of assets in emerging markets. And we were the first in 1986 manager in that, in emerging markets when the IFC hired us to manage assets for them. And I was part of that effort.
Let me ask you, from your background and understanding the role you're going into, what have you visualized as being the type of things you'd be sensitive to for conflict of interest?
I think conflict of interest, I have done a lot of work on that in my own responsibility at Capitol. It wasn't necessarily conflict, but I was involved in trying to work with the FPPC in California regarding the Form 700 requirements as they relate to our non-U.S. money managers. I've obviously been following the pay-to-play developments through the past 10 years. I guess they first started to heat up from a regulatory perspective as a lawyer, and the only lawyer on the executive committee of the institutional account managers. I was, sensitive to discussions regarding conflicts, but in some ways it goes further than that, because it also involves some fiduciary issues regarding different fee schedules for different types of clients, and to be sure that they were all being treated fairly. It may not be a conflict of interest so much, but a fiduciary type of sensitivity to each and every new product, fees, things like that we were moving forward with.
Are you familiar with the recent audits by the controller and then the recent study by the women's voters regarding recommendations as relates to both of the pension systems?
I have not read those, no.
Yeah, we were just looking, I want to be sure, because all of a sudden I'm getting excited because it says you're a CD11 resident, but then I'm looking further and it says Santa Monica, California. Are you in Santa Monica or are you in CD11?
Well, Mr. Rosendahl, we have I've met with you a few years ago about our sewer problem in LA, if you remember me, the Rhodes Scholar. And so I have a Santa Monica mailing
But you live in the
address.
Canyon.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm part of the Canyon Pact that had the issues.
See,
up
they
there.
shouldn't put Santa Monica, California. They should put Los Angeles,
Well,
California.
actually, on everything that I've been writing Santa Monica paren LA, because that's my mailing, and this is more than you need to know. If you write my address and put Los Angeles, the mail will come back.
No, I know we have that issue all the time with Santa Monica Canyon. So I apologize for not being enthused, but then I looked and I said, was it confused more than anything else? How's your sewer problem?
It's the same. It's the same.
But she is a resident.
And I understand why the city will not, we all understand why the city will not help us, and we are very grateful for the attention.
Yeah, well, it's a big issue. Let me ask you this. Why do you want to go on this board?
Well, I was asked to go on the board, and when I found out more about it and spoke to different people about it, they thought that I would be very well suited to do this, and that I should volunteer my time to do it. I understand that there's a lot of challenges. It would be a totally different type of challenge, say, 5 years ago. And it is an area that I've not been in for the past 5 years, and I feel like I do miss a bit of the business aspect of certain things, and I do feel like I will probably be a fish in water in this particular role.
Yeah.
And so it's a good fit, and I don't want to say I'm not excited or interested, but it's one of these things where it's a harder
Natural
discussion
growth
not
is
to
what
do it
you're
than to do it.
basically saying.
It's
Your
kind of,
background gives
Yeah.
you a sense of comfort that you can handle these things. Let me ask you this. Without getting into the politics we have to deal with, that's our reality here. All the pension funds in everybody's world, including private funds, have suffered immensely in the last 10 months. Returns and situational aspects are pretty serious. Most private sector, non-big shots, who have created their own retirement plans, I say non-big shots, I mean those who don't get stock options and bonuses, you know, the elite of our capitalist system, the average person on the verge of baby boom retirement. They're a year behind me. I'm 64, I'm born in 45. That whole arc of folk are going to start pressing against retirement and health care issues. When you look at that and you look at what Lacer's responsibility is, and you know the crisis we're in as a city, one of the things we're constantly told, we have a structural deficit, and it's been getting worse over the years. And we're not even sure the exact dollar figure that we're looking at today or tomorrow, but it has been impacted by the down economy, but it was also a reality before the down economy hit. Let's be clear about this. We were looking at a $250 million issue a couple of years ago, a year ago. Now we're looking at potentially $1 billion issue in 2010, 2011. Sitting on that board, reflect on retirement plans and what would be the right strategy to keep that solvent at the same time, in your mind, not the city constantly bailing it out, which we can't do. We have services to provide our constituents. Do you get any sense about the moment we're in?
I have a sense of the moment that we are in, and that is a huge question. And it's a huge challenge, and the role on this board is, I believe, going to be very different than it has been in the past, and the challenges are going to be multiples of what they have been in the past. And what the answers are I am assuming, going to be just a laundry list of options and basically discussion and analysis, trying to filter through in a careful way how to solve the problem, which is really beyond anyone. You mentioned a few years ago it was already $250 million. I mean, it's been something that's building and building, and I don't know how to answer that question, because it's the big question, and I just can see that it will require a lot of analysis and information, and the board needs to get all of that and needs to be sure to tap into the right resources to come to the right answers. And of course, it all is going to come down to money and where it comes from and how it gets moved around and all of that.
Well, I would look forward, when you're, assuming you're appointed and all that, in about 6 months, if you could come back and give us some advice. I would like to hear, because you know the world better than I do, that world, and maybe you could, from the inside, be able to give us some advice. And I would look forward to that.
I'd be happy to, yes.
Just a couple questions. Last week when I saw Sally last, she was saying, let's hope for a good Thursday to close the month of June out. It was devastating Thursday, but the good news is, I just checked, we're up 44 for the day and it's closed, so that's one little good sign. Let me just ask you your point of view. Obviously, when we look at pension funds, we're looking at the retirement for all these people sitting here. They want to know that it's safe when it gets there, and we've gone through a very bad year. For both you who have business and market backgrounds, where do you see the market at now? Have we hit the bottom? Are we bouncing along the bottom? Are you bearish? Are you bullish? What's just your personal view?
We are somewhere in the bottom. And
Somewhere in the
we've
bottom.
been saying that for months and months and months. And so somewhere in the bottom, it could still, I don't know that we're at the bottom. My feeling is that we're not at the bottom. How long it's going to last, I feel a little bit more pessimistic than optimistic.
That's fair.
I mean,
Yeah, and it's a personal judgment.
yeah.
You watch the financials, are going to have half the day on the other one side and half on the other, so. And you?
I try not to watch what happens day to day or month to month, and I think that with a pension fund, we really have the option of looking long-term and taking a real long horizon. I wrote down a note, in 1987, when we had that market crash of 500 points, which seemed like a lot back then, the Wall Street Journal the next day had interviewed all of the CEOs of all of the major companies, and they gave these long explanations. And Ace Greenberg, who at the time was running Bear Stearns way back in '87, was quoted with one sentence. He said, "Stocks fluctuate, next question." I think that from a long-term horizon, we don't have to worry about what happens day to day. We can really think about people who are retiring down the road and what the long-term trends are rather than this week or this year even.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And that, on that point then, the second question, and the staff's heard me say this a lot, so you know what the question is, Mike and Sally, but dealing with the corridors and the smoothing aspect, when you talk about long-term, that's great for the pension system. For us, we have to look at these 5-year moving windows or these corridors that you're in, because that determines how much we have to give to the out of the general fund every year. And so you'll be seeing before you a proposal which the staff's been working on diligently for about a year about looking at the corridors or the smoothing to see if it should be extended or changed. Do you have any points of view on that? Are you up to speed on that at all? The idea of corridors and smoothing, have you been
Yes,
briefed on
I'm
that?
familiar with those concepts, and I've read the materials. It's conventional wisdom, I think, now in actuarial work to consider all of those points and cost but whether I have an opinion about it, my background is in the defined contribution world, not the defined benefit world. And I thought that PowerPoint that was presented was very, very good, because I felt that I was, able to sit, as were the people to whom it was presented, with not a high degree of actuarial expertise. And so I think that is something that another way to deal with having outside people help you come up with the proper numbers.
Okay. Ms. Wortman?
I've been told about the issue. I'm aware of it. I understand the concepts. I don't think I'm in any position right now to, certainly not to make a recommendation. I think ultimately I'm a believer that the board's first and fiduciary duty is to those in uniform and those people whose pensions on the line, and it would be my intention to look at this from the view of what's in their best interest first.
I appreciate that, and as someone who will be retiring from the city and looking for the pension, those are the kind of things we're concerned about. But as we sit on this committee, we also have another responsibility, and that is the fiduciary responsibility to all the taxpayers who pay that bill. And that, as we look at it, we're looking at taking our pension contribution of 30 to 40% of our city's budget up to 80% in just a few years. That time horizon is very frightening, and it really pushes the city to the bankruptcy point if we aren't careful. So I hope you'll keep all of that in mind, particularly as you look at smoothing and corridors. One thing is making sure that the pensions are safe for the people when they retire. The second thing is to make sure the city doesn't go bankrupt, making it safe for them. So I hope you keep both concepts in mind. And one last one is not a trick question, because the staff didn't even know what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago when I brought this up. Are you familiar at all with the Contreteef cycles? Good. Okay. All right. That's no problem. I'm sending over to them this report.
No.
It's an economic theory that was written in the 1910s by a socialist from Russia who predicted the cycles we're in, and he's been actually right on for over 100 years. And his cycle predicts a very volatile marketplace for us for the next 10 years. Not just a very quick cycle movement out, but a very long, prolonged, painful period. We have to be very careful during that time how we invest. So now I'm sending over the documents to the department to pass out to all of you commissioners. But that's all I have. Thank you very much, and it was very informative, both of you.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to, not so much of a question, but to comment and ask if you dare to comment even further, would want to comment any further on the issue brought up by my colleagues and Mr. Smith in terms of the city's contribution to the pension system and how that's becoming increasing over the next few years. The unfunded liabilities that we have for the city, and that although we've had one of the most difficult fiscal years this past year, we're bracing ourselves for the future. Any comments on your role on the commission and how you may or may not help with what we're looking at as one of our most important issues facing the city in the future?
So I haven't.
All of us are always looking for answers on what to do there, so.
I think we'll have to be realistic, not only about what the actuaries say, but also about what's reality for the city and their ability to make the payments, to create a scenario where the city becomes illiquid in order to take care of the actuarial requirements will have to be taken into account. You can't take blood from a stone. So I think I understand that all of it has to be taken into account, but I'm not in a position at this point to really fully understand the numbers, at least.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Look forward to working with you.
That's all.
Adlai, let me ask you, you're currently a professor at USC?
Mm-hmm.
And what is your expertise as a professor?
Excuse me?
What is your expertise as a professor?
So I'll give you a little bit about my background. I understand my resume didn't make it out. I have a BA in economics from State University of New York at Stony Brook. I went straight to Wall Street and spent 4 years on a trading desk. Left in '84 and got an MBA in finance from Wharton. Went back to Wall Street for another 14 years where I was a public finance investment banker, and all of my career from that point was government finance, understanding it, helping governments do their job better. I left in 2000, and in 2001 took over a homeless agency called Chrysalis, which Councilmember Rosendahl mentioned, where we ran one of the largest what's called a social enterprise. We actually, all the people that you see downtown sweeping the streets worked for us. It was a $4.5 million business, and we hired about 1,000 homeless people a year. I left there a year and a half ago in order to create a center over at USC called the Society and Business Lab, where we look at how to integrate and use the best of business resources, business education, to apply to the social, health, and environmental issues facing the world. So I guess that's my background as relates to this.
Very good. And let me, the reports I asked earlier from Mrs. Conroy, I'd really appreciate if both of you take the opportunity to look at that last cycle of audits by the controller. And also, we've recently sent the report by the League of Women Voters asking both pension systems to look at their recommendations as it relates to addressing issues that are going to be before the city. And that would give a good deal of information. The other issue that we had a budget hearing on a while back is this whole issue of placement agents. And that's something that both pension systems are going to be looking into and making recommendations back to the council and their commissions, and then eventually to the council. So I'm not going to ask you your position on them, but clearly it is a very important issue that's come forth primarily in the police fire. And recently I read in the paper that I'm getting a police fire pension, so I am concerned that it continues to flow. But
I'll do my best.
okay, appreciate that. Let me ask both Sally and Mike, if you can come up and just give us an overview of what and how we ended the year.
And I just want to thank both of you for stepping to the plate. I think we're really better off served. I was very impressed with what you said there. We need to talk about your sewer thing offline. But thank you for stepping to the plate, and thank you all.
No, don't leave. Where did we end up on June 30th?
We have an estimate on a rate of return, still got to be audited because we have to take a hard look at private equity and real estate. But the approximate market value of assets is $11 billion, and a rate of return is negative 20%.
What was that again?
Negative 20 for the fiscal year. Our assumed rate of return is 8% every year, so essentially that means we were down negative 28.
How do we compare the negative 20% with other municipalities?
I don't have the information on the public funds. There's a lot of information out there on the endowments, and they've done worse than we have. Although, to be candid, in past years, they've done better than we have, largely because of the investments they've made in alternative investments like private equity and hedge funds.
And then Sally,
For Lacer's preliminary unaudited numbers ending June 30th, our one-year return is negative about 19.8. That's net of fees. And we'll have the audited numbers in about 10 days.
and what was your assumption? Was it?
Ours is also 8%. And again, that 8% is assuming on average over a 30-year time horizon or longer.
And then, Sally, I think one of the meetings you gave us is that we were roughly $2 billion unpaid liability, unfunded liability, and with the market ending, where does that put us on that number?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but that's correct. Our current unfunded liability as of June 30th, 2008 was about $2.3 billion unfunded liability. That with a negative 20% or close to negative 20%, it'll probably close to double. But again, I would have to look at our projections again to see what that liability will grow to.
And then what was the dollar value of the portfolio that you're managing?
So as of June 30th, it was about 8.1 billion, close to 8.1 and 8.2 billion.
Let me just ask the CLA, one of the things this committee asked a while back is that when we do these review for commissioners, that we get a full package. And in this case, we did not get nearly enough information to go through from their resumes or their information that deals with the letter from the Ethics Department. So I would ask if we can work with the mayor's office so we can get a full package of information so we can give their review appropriate thought. And I'd also ask that before these two recommendations go to the city council, that the entire package is available for council members as a group. So, any other questions?
Are you sure you want to do this after hearing those numbers? Last chance. Okay.
Thank you very much for serving, and we look forward to seeing you at the city council.
Yeah, no, man. Remember, we didn't ask for it back.
Okay, we're going to go in closed sessions on items 1, 2, and 3, and then come back to the agenda.
Okay.
18 when it comes back.
Click on that. You wanted 16 or 18?
18, let me see what my question was first.
18 was on that concept.
I wanted to know if there was an indemnification on the part of the city in case these guys cause problems. For waiver of the conflict.
Yeah, but it basically, he used to do our bond sales, and now he's working for a company that also
They hired who?
did our bonds. So they're asking for a waiver.
Good for him.
The conflict
Who's the odd man out, he
used to
said, at the table.
be underwriter for the city, now he's being brought into a deal
Okay.
outside the city, so he's in conflict.
It is pretty funny.
And we can just ask,
Just ask him if it's a-
CAO could give that information
Yeah.
to the clerk. Okay, we ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Item number 9 on the agenda is a Housing Authority report relative to the distribution of Shelter Plus Care units citywide and the department's efforts to increase permanent supportive housing.
And this record reflects, we're back in session, open session, we have a quorum. Mr. Rezar, Mr. Rosenthal, Mr. Smith, myself, Bernard Parks is the chair. Now, what item again?
Item number 9.
Okay, let me just hold off for 1 second. On number 18, Mr. Smith, why don't you?
Yeah, I just wanted, if you could report back when this comes to council for me on the waiver of because of a conflict of interest on the contract for Hawkins, would you clarify that there's some sort of hold harmless agreement or whatever to protect the city in case there's any challenges, legal challenges by their participation?
Okay.
I just want to make sure we're,
Yes, we'll follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. When I read that quickly, I also need to know that even if we give a waiver for whatever conflicts, it seems like this was a sole source, and if it was, is there an explanation as to why that's the case?
maybe we can.
Was it? I may have been.
Yeah, I think this particular attorney has been hired by another attorney firm. And so they're basically through, as the city attorney said, through an abundance of caution, he's just asking for a waiver because he's done previous work for the city of
So it
LA.
wasn't, okay.
They're a
got it.
subcontractor on a
Right.
private contract.
But we will provide the information you asked for. Yeah.
Could you have that information to the clerk so they can put it in the committee report?
Yes.
We have to clarify. And then we will go back and consent 13, Mr. Rosenthal.
Yeah, and I want to make sure Department of Aging comes before the council so that the cameras can catch it, so seniors who are interested will get some good answers.
Very good.
We have some representatives from HACLA here to answer questions.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Peter Lynn. I'm the Director of Section 8 for the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, and with me is Carlos Van Adder, the Assistant Director for Special Programs.
Okay. Hold on, we're on what, 9?
9.
Yes.
What number is this?
This is number 9.
Very clear?
Now,
All right, we're good?
Okay. Well, this is the one, I think I put this on special because I think this is a question you asked Mr. Rosenthal in committee, and I think it deals with a couple of issues in your district.
that's right. Yeah. You know, there are several things we're looking at here that need some backup information. One is regarding HACLA's effort to increase permanent supportive housing in the 11th District. 3, SPC sponsors administrating 123 units are located in the district of the Venice Community Housing Corporation, St. Joseph Center, and Ocean Park Community Center is located in the city of Santa Monica. HACLA reports that it is working with the West LA Veterans Administration Center to lease up to 840 HUD vouchers targeting homeless veterans and the families with housing and supportive services. Could you give us a report on that and how that's going?
Yes, on the HUD VASH program, the 840 VASH vouchers, we do work with the West LA VA Medical Center. Most of, or a lot of the tenants are locating in the area generally surrounding the West LA VA Medical Center, and that's why we feel that this is also going to support clients in that area finding affordable housing, permanent supportive housing.
And have we been able to distribute all 840?
Not yet. We expect to do that by the end of this year.
I know there was an issue earlier in outreach. Have we overcome that issue?
Yes, we've been working closely with the West LA VA Medical Center, and they have stepped up the amount of referrals that they send to the Housing Authority, because we can only work on the referrals they sent us as far as applications.
Yeah. Are there any other efforts you're doing in my CD? You know, I happen to believe in affordable housing. We have a substantial amount of homeless all over the place, as well as now we have people in cars and campers, and we're the only place where they can go. So it's just becoming quite a scene in Venice. Is there anything you're doing right now that can give me some hope?
Well, citywide, we do work with the other city partners like the LA Housing Department and CRA and the Permanent Supportive Housing Program. We recently had that NOFA open. It has closed, and we've received a number of applications, and we'll be reviewing those to see whether or not they can be approved for the new round.
Are you familiar with one project we're looking at on Culver Boulevard near Englewood and Culver, where we're looking at 155 units of senior housing with the developer, private sector?
No, what is the name of that building?
It's going to be called Delray Plaza, and it's under construction. Maybe you should talk to some of the other folks in your group.
Okay.
There is progress being made. People are interacting with other people and putting something together there. I'm very excited about that. That's it for me.
Let me just ask you if you could do us a favor on some of these that you identify with multiple districts. Is there a way you can break down units by district? So
Yes, we have a number of sponsors that do serve applicants citywide. We can do determination by councilmatic district, even for those citywide areas, too.
the issue is the location of the facility might be within one district, but they're drawing from 3 districts.
Serving people across the city, too, particularly agencies like the Department of Mental Health.
If you could do that for us, it gives us an idea, as opposed to just, like, I think we have a couple that were lumped with 1 and 8, and then 1, 8 and 13, so we have some idea of
Okay.
what CB8 is, the contribution to them.
We can do that.
Okay. Great. And then let me ask, this was a report that I think came out of one of the budget hearings. One of the things that asked, we had asked Housing Authority also to give us an overview of how they were going to use 09 and 10's pilot money. And they've kind of ignored us for 2 or 3 years in a row. So rather than wait for the budget hearings, if we can get that 09, 10 information, it'd be helpful.
Okay.
So if we can add that instruction to the report, that we are re-emphasizing the need for HACLA to advise the committee of how they intend to spend 09, 10 pilot money.
We'll take that
And
back.
get that back in some reasonable time.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll take that question back.
Thank you. So we'll move that item 9,
right.
with those instructions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 10 is a motion Park Smith relative to the city attorney to report regarding the extent to which the city controller is empowered to levy taxes owed from payments for goods and services to individuals or businesses.
Good afternoon, Beverly Cook from the City Attorney's Office. In specific answer to your question, the short answer is yes. The controller has the authority to offset against payments owed to contractors to satisfy business tax obligations.
How do we cause that to occur? Is that
The City Attorney's Office, along with staff for both the Office of Finance and the Controller's Office, have met in order to come up with a process in order to have that occur, because normally what is forwarded to the Controller's Office are invoices for payments to be made to the contractors. Already in place, or should be in place, any contractor that's to be paid by the Controller has to have a BTRC number, and that's the initial registration. What had not been caught was the fact that if it went on for more than 1 year, if the contractor had failed to pay renew their business tax, while their records showed that they had a BTRC, it didn't necessarily show that they were current in their taxes. So the departments now will take a look at it. I don't know all of the details of the financial systems that are in place, but there should be that ability to procedurally move the information from the Office of Finance over to the Controller's Office and withhold those payments or offset the payments that are due the contractors that owe taxes, business
Are there any other
taxes.
source of indebtedness within the city that the controller should be made aware of other than Department of Finance? Do we have Department of Finance here?
Don't see anyone.
No.
Are there other sources?
I'm not aware of any obligations that would occur unless it would be building and safety. You know, it could occur in any number of other circumstances. I think the big issue would be Office of Finance with business tax obligations.
Because I was thinking, too, that we're constantly waiving fees or forgiving fees, and I don't know, I know business licenses are probably the most obvious.
Yes.
But I would like to also make sure that we evaluate, being that the controller has this authority, what other sources, and we're not necessarily looking for, $3.90 or something, but we really need to make sure that if there are other sources, building and safety or planning or things of that nature that are sums of money, and I would suspect it would not be we wouldn't consider things such as paramedic bills because that's too much of a haywire, but there may be some that are not obvious to us today, but we'd like to make sure we cover as many bases as we can and not just settle for business tax if there are other revenues that we should be looking at.
And actually, the Office of Finance not only collects for taxes, all of the business taxes and any other parking occupancy, transient occupancy, they also collect any delinquencies throughout the city.
Yeah.
So they would have that information available as well, and they can forward that information to the controller's office to withhold those payments, because the collection unit is really the citywide collection unit and not just the Office of Finance. So that information would actually be available, but it would be incumbent upon the departments to forward that information to the Office of Finance, state that it's a delinquency, and then forward that information on to the controller's office.
There's a dollar value or something that we require to go to the Department of Finance, and then there's a time period, I guess, on the smaller amounts or something.
Actually, what happens is the departments, any amount up to $3,000, I should say, is referred directly out to collection agencies. Any amount in excess of $3,000 is referred to the Office of Finance for collection purposes, and then forwarded to the city attorney's office to file lawsuits. But it is still you can go through the Office of Finance. However, if it's under the $3,000 and under, the departments are authorized to directly refer to the collection agencies.
Okay. Now, on the reverse of that, do we have a system to where, as we're making decisions on hiring a company to do something, that we're aware if they're delinquent in their payments before we even go into business with them?
I'm not sure there's a system in place. I suppose a department could always verify with Office of Finance whether or not a particular business is in good standing, assuming that they're subject to the business tax ordinance. And one of the overall concerns generally is the business tax has a confidentiality provision, and so we have limitations on what information can be disclosed. However, when it's for purposes of enforcing that ordinance, we can disclose that information. And so I guess it would really just be up to the department that's about to engage in a large contract. One of the things that we did discuss overall in looking at this particular aspect was including in all of the city's contracts in their standard provisions the requirement that the city had the ability to offset for any delinquencies that were owed the city. So that's going to be in future contracts, and obviously we just have to be concerned with the ones that are outstanding now to enforce this particular section.
But isn't there a current requirement that everyone that gets a contract from the city must have a business license?
That's correct. And under the present procedures, the controller has no authority to pay once they look at that section in the record as to whether or not there's a BTRC number. So if you fail to register, there's no BTRC number and hopefully no payment.
Okay. So to implement this charter section, what is it that we have to do? Give instructions to the city attorney? Is that, or the controller?
Actually, there's nothing we have to do, fortunately. We've all met, and it's really going to be a departmental issue in terms of, and as I said before, the departments have already met to see how they're going to move the information, compare the records, and do the actual offset. But there are no ordinance amendments, no other administrative section, municipal code sections that need to be amended in order to have this happen. It's just a procedural matter between the two departments to advise of who's delinquent and then offset those payments that are due.
And what kind of timeline would we talk about having that implemented?
Geez, we met about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I think there are meetings scheduled within the next few weeks, and I would gather that it should be something that would be in place over the next month. There is apparently a new financial system, financial system that's going into place. I don't know what impact that is going to have on it, because that's not really up and running at this point, but I don't know the details of how much they're going to rely on that system.
Mr. Parks, we can ask that the Office of Finance send a representative to council at the time this is discussed, if you want to fill in more of the details.
All right, why don't we do that, and when we bring this to council, we'll have both the CAO and the city attorney and Department of Finance at the council meeting. And let me just ask one other instruction, if we can ask for a 6-month report back after the implementation of the system.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 11 is a motion Smith-Rosendahl relative to the CAO to report on the extent to which delays in reimbursements for city services from other entities can affect the availability of funding in a department's operating budget.
Okay. That's number 11.
Yes, number 11.
Mr. Smith's motion. Okay.
Smith Rosendahl. Very good. It's almost Smith Wesson. No.
We're going to get a report back?
Yes, we have some comments today if you wish to discuss it, but we can wait for the report back as well.
How long? Summer study.
Well, in this particular issue, I think obviously we understand the issue, and it's probably in reference to the fire department this year where we were reporting a deficit, and a part of that deficit was because they had expended funds on these emergencies. I think our office basically would recommend that we not appropriate funds directly to the budget for several reasons. One, I think that one of the bigger problems that we see is that the funding comes in over 2 fiscal years. That council instruction would actually then appropriate funds to a department for an expenditure from the prior year, and it's going to, in our view, could get very confusing. But we do think, we understand the issue certainly, and we would have several recommendations how to address that specific problem in the future, because we certainly understand your concern.
Yeah, my concern is we in the news media slam a department for being over budget, and part of their over budget is because they did what they're supposed to do, and somebody owes us the money. When we get it, it goes in a different pocket. So they look bad. Our general fund looks good, or, well, never good, but better. And that's not right. So I just want to see what your recommendations are. So when?
We can get a report in 30 days.
Yeah, and the one thing, and I certainly think that study is needed to determine how it's impacting the operation, but the issue on where the money goes, I think the item 20 is a clear example of how we manage people's accounts. Police are $4 million in the hole. We feel it to get them out of the fiscal year, as opposed to making them rearrange it. So there's a give and take on both sides of the argument.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll look for that in 30 days.
Okay.
Okay. Next item.
Item 12 is the city attorney and CAO reports relative to the Victim Assistance Program grant for fiscal year 2008-2009.
Just in the nick of time.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Ida Rubio with the City Administrative Office. The report before you is requesting authority to accept the City Attorney's 29th year grant award for the Victim Assistance Program from the County of Los Angeles. The grant award is in the amount of $808,000 for the period of July 1st, 2008 through June 30th, 2009. So your approval would be retroactive. The total annual program costs are $963,888. Of this amount, $808,279 would be reimbursed by the grant, and the remaining $155,609 is the city's required match. The department staff is here also if you have any additional questions about the program.
Let me just say, because I think we're pretty well familiar with this, this come through several times, and I appreciate the CAO and the department following through and reducing the city's commitment and not go beyond what our grant responsibilities are. The one thing I was confused on is that we're going retroactive, and I just didn't understand how we got so late, because on the previous reporting, we go back and on the 8th year, we went through the cycle of getting it approved by two committees in June, July of '07, and the council actually approved it in August of '07. But here, we're beyond the ending date, and we're just getting it to committee, and I'm just wondering how that works on sending out the invoices, and, I mean, because we've already done the work, we've obviously budgeted for the positions, so is this going to pay, do we just put this in the general fund?
This will reimburse, it's my understanding that the department has received some reimbursements. Those will be deposited into one of their off-budget accounts, and then they will have to transfer the money to the general fund.
Okay, but then what happens starting July 1st on this program?
July 1st for 2000, for this fiscal year?
Yeah, for this fiscal year. Have we applied for another grant, or?
Yeah. Kathy, can you address that question? Or Derek?
I'm sorry, repeat the question
I'm
one
saying,
time.
this grant ends before we even approve it. So it appears as though we would have been submitting invoices all during the year, so this money rightfully would go into the general fund for this grant. Now, what happens July 1st? Is there another grant that you're going to seek for the 30th year, or how do those funds, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, are these monies we're after on this grant? It appears we've already done the work, and they're just merely being retroactively put into the general fund. Or is this money going to be used to fund this current year's program?
No, any reimbursement that will be received will be for 0809, and the department will be submitting a transmittal for 0910.
Okay, but let me ask you this then, during the year of the grant, do they send monthly invoices to be paid? And did that occur during
It's my understanding.
0809?
It's my understanding that they did invoice the county,
Okay.
and that they have received some reimbursements. I'm still waiting to hear an update on how much actually has been received for 0809.
Okay, so if you can let us know, would we know that before it came to council?
Yes.
Okay, if we can find that out, and then when do we apply for next fiscal year? This fiscal year.
Kathy Colabong, City Attorney, Victim Assistance. Yes, we're preparing the transmittals to be submitted so it can go through City Council. Right now, we have a draft working, and it's about to be approved by our financial officer to be submitted. And this is a continuing grant, so the programs continue, and we subcontract through the County of LA. Monthly expenditure forms are submitted with our expenses, and they in turn submit quarterly billings to the state of California for reimbursement. And that's the process for which we receive the funding back.
Is there some reason why we're so late on this one? Is it?
Just referring back to my notes, I know back in early September, I believe it was, the department had asked the CAO's office to hold off on finalizing the report because they were advised that they were going to be receiving a reduction in the initial grant award. And so we held off on it for a couple of months, and they did receive a small reduction in the award, and they did also reduce some of their staffing through attrition. So the report, unfortunately, the report didn't get finalized till about February, late March. It was released in March.
Okay. And so when will we expect the this year's report to come through? Any idea on that?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
What is the timeline for this year's grant request? When will that come before?
Well, right, Kathy referred to had just stated that they're working on a draft transmittal right now, and it's pending approval from their finance office.
Do we have
And once-
a guideline of when we think it will come through the council?
Probably within the next month or two. We can ask the budget office if they can put a rush on that review.
If we can get that information also when we come to council,
Yes.
that and the prior information as to how the funding and whether we got the full amount of money.
Just to clarify, this money comes from court fines, as I recall? Is that what funds it?
Yes, it's through the restitution fund, fined through convicted criminals
Okay,
at
the
sentence.
state can't touch that money because they're taking everything else? Yeah, no, I'm serious, they're
the
taking
hope that-
things they don't have a legal right to take, but they're taking them.
They could possibly take that, but that's not what I've understood that is going to happen. If we're secure in terms of our funding, it's going to stay in place, we're going to move forward, and it's not a possibility at this point that they would even touch that.
Okay, so they have given notice that they intend to go forward and the dollar amount will remain constant?
Yes.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to know. Are we looking at 800,000? How much are we looking from the county? On an annual basis, every year the same amount?
Typically turns over in the same amount, yes.
Could it get larger?
It could, but during this, these economic tough times, I doubt that number would increase over any time in the near future, but there is a possibility.
Do you
it
have
could
any
increase.
programs in the field we cut back? Anecdotally, I was told the Pacific Division, which is one of my divisions in the West Side, that their funding was slowing down or being cut. There were people involved with it that were concerned and came to me.
Right. That's a LA County police station. They staff their advocates out of LA County through that particular station. So I believe the director of that program made some decisions about how to manage her staff, and I think she may have put somebody there part-time or moved them into the courts there. But it's not a station that's manned by the city attorney's office.
Could you get me that report for the Pacific Division so
Sure.
I can know that those answers? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, on item 12, we'll move that item, approve the CAO's recommendations, and with those two items for requested information when it comes to council.
On item 13, we had initially had that on consent. I understand Mr. Rosendahl had some questions, but I don't believe the department reps are still here.
Yeah, we would
Oh.
love them to publicly discuss it on the city council floor. A lot of seniors watch that channel, and it would be informational for them if they could get that information.
All right, we'll get that message out then.
Okay.
Item 14 and 15 are city treasurer investment reports for the months ending March and April of 2009.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. If you could just give us a verbal, as update as you can, on our current condition, we'd appreciate it.
Certainly, Councilmember Joya DeFore, City Treasurer. And before I begin, since we're at the beginning of the fiscal year, I'd like to give you our view and how we'll be operating going forward strategically as we approach the city's investments. In my view, we're still a ways from recovery, of 12 to perhaps 18 months. We've seen what looks like brief recoveries in the market, but I think that was people reacting to good news. And I think that now people are looking for what's the reality. There's even talk of a stimulus, too. I think that's evidenced as looking at the savings rate for the U.S. citizen, average U.S. citizen, which is at its highest rate in a couple of decades. It's like 6.5%. So the consumer isn't spending money. If you look back to about October when the stimulus packages started, the banks are actually sitting on more money than they were. They're seeing more money now than they were then. So for all the stimulus and all the federal input, I don't see a vast improvement. So we will continue with our conservative measures. And I mentioned that just because as going forward, we really have to look at the impact to the general fund. We know the general fund's percentage of our general pool is decreasing. So while our performance is good, the general fund, because of the impediments to the receipts, people wanting to take our money, people not wanting to pay money, the percentage is decreasing, so that's going to have an impact on the general fund revenue over the coming year.
Are you still finding short-term, we're doing much better than long-term?
Short term, I think so. Cal has the numbers man has all the details.
Hi, Hal Nakriba, Chief Investment Officer. Just as a brief backdrop in terms of...
Answer the question first.
Okay. In terms of our expectations for rates, we are expecting short-term rates to gradually increase over the course of the next year as well as long-term rates. And that's primarily due to the fact that over the course of the next 4 quarters, we're expecting gross domestic product growth to increase slightly. And that's primarily due to an expectation of increasing consumer spending. How does that translate into our expectations for performance for the Treasurer's Pool? We're expecting slightly higher reinvestment rates for the $5.5 billion Treasurer's Pool, and that hopefully will help interest earnings for next year.
To answer your short question, though, the core portfolio or the short portfolio did perform better, relatively than the longer portfolio.
And then one of the things we always ask you about, are we pretty well implemented the stations, the Treasury stations, those are done?
We were recently informed by City Attorney that the outside work of council had been halted due to budget considerations last year. I've sent a message over asking have they authorized that work to resume for our Treasury workstation.
Okay, now why did they halt them?
We were informed that they had run out of money for their outside counsel. We were not informed when that happened.
Okay. If you could talk with them before this comes to council and see if that gets clarified, because this has been a long journey, and we're, from what I can see from my notes, we were thinking July 1st, 2009 it'd be done.
We were.
Okay, so if we could get with them and find out what the delay and work with the CAO in determining just what is going on so we can get a better sense, because the sooner we get that done, I think the better we are as a city to have that functioning. And then any other background information on that little controversy we had with the one lending institution that reneged on their what is it, their interest rate?
Well, that institution, they wanted to suspend working with us, and we thought it in the best interest of the city not to work with them. If this had been the only instance, that would have, maybe we could have dealt with it and worked around it. But the same institution unilaterally tried to compensate the city on a different basis than we had otherwise contracted for. And this institution also attempted to unilaterally last December, while we were under the old contract, terminate our $100 million revolving letter of credit that we had negotiated in case of an emergency. So I just think it's in the best interest of the city. I am aware that, and I did write a letter to their chairman and CEO and did receive a response. And what is concerning to me, the people we were dealing with were at the levels just below the chairman and CEO. So until this institution stabilizes its operations and develops, I think, a healthier respect for the treatment of public funds, I think it's in our best interest not to do business with them.
Just curious, when you made that comment about the banks, they did get a lot of bailout money, but you said they're sitting
Yes.
on the taxpayers. How does it impact us?
I can't speak for the city as a whole. In the case of our investments, it has very little effect. We're big enough, and fortunately we have the staff and the software that the universe is large enough for us. My concern would be for some of the smaller players in the public sector.
No, I have nothing.
Okay, we'll move items 14 and 15, note and file with that one instruction to ask the treasurer to meet with the CAO-CLA regarding the workstation issue and see if we can get that resolved before we come to council. Next item.
Thank you.
Item 16 is a motion, Perry Alarcon and CLA report relative to the sale of 600 decommissioned traffic signal light bulbs at the below market value of $1 to the city of Tijuana, Mexico.
Mark Torres, CLA's office. This item is a CLA report relative to a request by Councilmember Perry to donate 600 decommissioned traffic signal lights to the city of Tijuana, Mexico. DOT has notified our office that they're in the process of replacing these stoplights with the LEDs, and Liaison from Mexico saw an opportunity to receive these, and they're requesting that they be donated to them for $1. Not each traffic signal light, but for the total donation.
My concerns were, as I recall the discussion, and Mr. Rosendahl was there as well, that the reason we're getting rid of these bulbs is because, one, they're no longer legal in California.
Yes.
And that they're no longer legal because of the environmental concerns, that they were bad for the environment and not good for energy production and not good for California. And then we went out and bought a whole bunch of them because we were concerned we'd run out of them. Now we're selling them for $1. And if it's bad for our environment, why is it good for Tijuana, Mexico's environment?
DOT would probably have a better answer for that. They're not here. So.
Okay.
We could just hold that to next week and ask DOT to be here.
As far as I know, they're going to go to the landfill, and the city has to pay to...
I understand that.
Yeah.
And they're not good for landfills either, but
Yes.
that's why we sent them to a e-waste landfill. We pay big money to do that. But we bought a whole bunch of these things in preparation for not running out of them because we were late 3 years in the first place installing the new LEDs. So we spent a lot of money to buy all these bulbs. Now we're selling them for $1. And if the reason we're getting rid of them is because they're not good for the environment, I just don't see any value to putting them one block across our border into Tijuana, Mexico, where it's so bad for the environment.
Do you have any bulbs we're talking about?
This particular donation, 600. I'm not sure.
And how many are still in city stores?
I was going to say, I'm not sure.
I want to know all that stuff.
Okay.
We can ask,
I'll get in touch with DOT.
yeah, LADOT to be here for next week. We can get that resolved.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item 17 is a motion, Weezar Gruel and CAO report relative to the Enterprise Risk Management Program Implementation Plan.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Goff with the CAO.
And Victor Parker with the CAO.
I think the reason I wanted to hold this to discuss it, we've gone through a little journey as a committee on this issue of liability now for a number of consecutive budget hearings. And I think we were probably the ones that pushed the controller to actually do the audit on risk management. And then we also took some great energy during the current budget cycle to identify the departments that were in the top 10% of liability for the city. And there's been a number of motions, and I think to the point that even on this report as it came out of audits, that I don't know if there's a reluctance, but I just don't get a sense that the CAO is embracing this effort to become the risk management group for the city to start this process moving. And although we're dealing with a dated report where we're talking about $35 million, I think last year it's significantly beyond that. And I just don't know why we can't get moving on this because of the dollar savings that we could make on liability as opposed to looking at what it might cost to put it in place. And so you can kind of explain what those delays are.
Yeah, I think Victor Parker against CAO, I'll try to answer that. I think, as you said, there's a lot of different motions, different directions, and I guess I'm hoping this one kind of brings it all together, because this is really about enterprise risk management, which is a much broader concept than the city currently practices. I mean, we practice it in silos, but we don't significantly coordinate it. And when I mean that, I'm talking about financial risk and revenue risk, environmental risk, ethics risk, human resources, operational, legal, and hazard, which is what you think of, hazard risk being insurance risk, like property losses or general liability, third-party auto losses, and workers' comp. So you have all these different risks the city faces, and they're all faced in somewhat silo format. And in risk management in the CAO, we deal with more specifically the hazard risks. So you're looking at kind of, with the ERM process, enterprise risk management process, you're looking at broadening that approach and trying to fold it all up for decision makers to see better what the risks the cities are facing, and communicate better and have more management accountability. So that's what I think we're hoping, that we can fold everything into it through this process. But in regard to, any reluctance, I think it's because through the controller's report and even their consultant, it had asked for resources, which we don't have. We didn't get the resources. They were advocating positions to go forward with this. What we're saying is we'd like to go forward with it, but we just don't have the positions. So we're going to do it to the best of our ability within existing resources.
But see, I think the dilemma I have is that I think one of the motions that Mr. Smith and I sent forward just a little bit ago before the budget, I mean, if this isn't something that should motivate us, that since 2006, we've spent $133 million in liability claims.
Right.
If that doesn't motivate us, I don't know what else will.
Right.
And it would appear that on this report today, that if it's a matter of positions, that it would have been recommended by the CEO to say, I can do this, but I need 4 positions. Then it's up to us to figure out, how do you pay for them? What do you need? Because I don't think we're going to get 40 departments to all fall in step until the CAO has a nucleus of people that makes this their life's journey to get it done. And so putting something together saying in 30 months or so many months we can get moving, I just think it begs the issue that, do we spend another $130-some million over the next 3 years and then we get motivated? I would hope that if there's a issue as far as personnel, that it would be recommended the need and allow us to cut it up, slash it up, ignore it, but just to say we're going to do it with in-house and we'll do it with our own resources, and we're not, and because we don't have the people, I think it begs the whole question, because we, doing budget, we asked the CAO and the CLA to identify the top 10 departments out of that $130-some-odd million. And we wanted to start a process of how do we get them motivated to do something about liability. But it's not going to happen until there's a focal point in the CAO's office. And so that's what I was concerned with when I read it. I said, we've sent it to the audit committee, the controllers audited. I think as a budget committee, we just kind of said it should be centralized in the CAO's office without a study. And so we've been waiting and churning this, and we just need to see how we can break loose and make it a reality to start an effective effort at a centralized point to deal with liability.
Yeah, I agree, and I think in governmental efficiency, we talked about, in the controller's report, really what they advocate too is to have, try to bring up a higher profile and a higher level of importance on risk management. I know that
the council has, certainly, and certainly Budget and Finance has. And part of it is to establish a committee with the council and mayor and controller and city attorney and CAO. And I think to get the formation of starting to get this steering committee together to try to move forward this program, and at that point, we talked about looking at the resource issue.
But I think with that committee, I think in variations, that committee exists on almost anything. We've got the mayor's office, the CLA, and the CAO sits on about 100 committees that we have different names on, depending on what the subject matter is. And so just creating it means that the principals have to show up to a meeting and say how we're going to kick this off. I mean, that's what I would say. I don't want to make it too simplistic, but it's not been a one-year process. It's been a multi-year process that, similar to our effort on grants, that we keep saying the CAO's got to embrace how do we deal with grants. They got to embrace how we deal with litigation, or else I sit through the claims board and then Budget and Finance, and we just keep writing checks. And the thing is that we don't even see as a committee the under $100,000 payouts. So it's a lot of money that we can do other stuff with, but we're not going to be able to get to it until the CAO actually creates something that starts the movement within 40 departments. And until that occurs, everybody's at their own devices.
And I mean, we hear you loud and clear. We've just been making incremental steps, and we've developed, talk about the top 10 departments. We've developed very comprehensive cost of risk reports for every single department that leads to liability in the city. And
we use your reports as part of our discussion in the budget hearings.
And some departments really embrace it, and other departments don't as much. We have assessments going on every single day. Had staff out today looking at some road issues because of subsidence and some liability issues because of that. Just today, I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So it's ongoing, but it has to be something that we all talk about all the time, just like you did in Budget and Finance, which was so great. We can't just make it the flavor of the month,
But see, I think what I would look at is that if we got the ball rolling in the CAO's office, we have the ability to bring those department heads into the committee and ask them directly, what are you doing on this process? Just as we talked about it in the budget. So you shouldn't feel all alone that you're fighting that battle alone. We want to make it available to where we make it meaningful. But I just don't think we could tolerate another 30 months of saying, let's just chug along and see how it goes, because in 30 months we could spend another $100 million.
Right, and again, focusing on pure hazard risk is very different from what the controller's report was advocating, which was this enterprise risk, and which would be a much more global approach. So that's why we're looking at that 30-month thing.
We looked at it from the CAO's office. We realize you have a more narrow view of what you've been doing, but I don't know where else we could place it to say who's going to look at it in the global view of the city other than the CAO.
Right.
Because you're the one that's looking at, these bonds that we have to float when we don't have enough money to pay for the litigation. It's all in that one ball of wax.
Right, I agree. Yeah.
Yes, we heard this item in audits committee either a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I forget. And the question we had, or we are focused on, is that will the CAO be able to do this without any additional resources? Because it's a huge undertaking where we are asking to look at risk management a bit differently, where we will pay more attention to risk management. So we were concerned about how we were asking the CAO to do more with less. We left that question up actually to this committee to see, well, let's allow Budget and Finance to evaluate that. Given that concern, we did ask the CAO to come back to the Audits Committee in 3 months to report back on the progress they've made on the Phase 1, where they will establish organizational infrastructure, which in their timeline has a 1 to 5 month time span. But like Mr. Parks mentioned, we could invest a little here and get a huge bang for our buck in terms of the savings we could realize with a lot of the improved communication, focusing on those liabilities that are the biggest liabilities for the city and find ways to lessen those. So the approach we took, Mr. Chair, is let's come back in 3 months in the audits committee and look at what progress CAO has taken, understanding full well that we were concerned about not having the additional resources for the CAO to implement the plan that they've created for us. So that's kind of where we are.
Because one of the things, I think until we can get the CAO to get moving, we can ask every department what their risk management plan is, and they'll give us a beautiful report, except most of it's not operational. And at the end of the year, we write a check and we say it's 134 this time and 132. What I'd like to do is see if whether we could hold this in committee for a couple of weeks and ask you to go back and look at what your proposals are, how you might accelerate it to where by the time you're reporting to audits, there's actually a program that's in place. And I'm not saying we could just bite off the whole apple at one time, but if we concentrate on the 10%, that's the bulk, or half of that 10%, or something meaningful to where we can say, these are the resources we need to make this impact. If we could make any sizable impact on the liability from not only what, the dollars that we're spending and a variety of other things from the lack of productivity while we're investigating all that stuff, we have made a major impact overall on the budget. And so if we could ask you to rethink and maybe close down that 30-month program and come back with what can you do to make an impact as the CAO and bringing resources, what kind of resources. If you give us the Cadillac and we can't afford it, we just may have to say, go with Ford. But whatever, I just don't think we can move it forward and say, in 30 months, we'll have a program.
So and you're talking about in regard to the whole enterprise risk management program.
I think you have the enterprise, but I think what I would look is you have the ability to cut a piece out of it to say, what can we make operational and how much of it? Because I don't think you can do it all at once. But if you go by your own report of the top 10%, that's a big apple that you can make an impact on. And how do we make an impact on that? And what are the resources? Because I don't think we would be using money wisely if we're saying, go after that department that had $2,000 liability. But when you're talking double-digit millions, I think you can make an impact.
In other words, I think what you have before you in your three phases of implementation is like you're planning for a 30-month project. The chairperson of this committee is saying, we're in a crisis here. Go after those immediate things that we could have some immediate returns right away. And I would suggest also while you're planning for that longer enterprise system that we're trying to create here, but as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to build, let's talk about Star Trek here, the enterprise, flying world we're going to create, and that's going to take a while. Let's just go for some immediate things that helps us survive right now, and while doing the 30-month enterprise system that we want to create.
Because I wouldn't say build anything that you have to tear down on the bigger program, but I would think we'd be able to pull something together and say our focus for the next 12 months through this fiscal year, just as we did in the budget, is how do we really attack the top 10%? And if we do that, what kind of resources do we need? What are the things we need to do? What can we do during this budget year?
And so, just to be clear, I think seems like you're focusing more on the hazard risk immediately. When I say hazard, I mean like the liability, comp, that kind of stuff immediately.
The comp, I don't know if the workers' comp, I don't know if we have a solution for that until they do something in Sacramento.
Okay.
But I think the things we do have a solution for are just where are these other liabilities, these court lawsuits, these trips and falls, because so many of these we find out later while we're going through the process that somebody knew about it in advance. We just didn't quite go out and trim the tree limb, or the branch was hanging over the street for 5 years before it fell into the truck. Those are the things, or again, when you look at departments and say, what are your plans? They give you beautiful reports, We just don't know whether there's anything behind them that operationally makes them look at liability differently than they've been looking at.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to be clear on that.
I don't think workers' comp, I would tell you that at this point, I don't think you should put your energies in that because we don't have a lot of control over it.
Okay.
And when we get those reports in here, it's state law drives it, it's industrial, we can quibble over $22, and when it's all over, most of it is pretty well in play. But it's the other stuff I think we can make an impact.
Okay.
Okay? So if we held this for a couple of weeks, okay. If one of the things, we're going to have department reports coming in is that next week?
Yes.
With where they're going to come up with their organizations?
Oh, the new organizations.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. I know that was the initial plan, but some of the labor decisions that have been made may impact those operational plans. I'll have to ask Ray.
Because I'd like to tie these two together, that we do the operational reports, that they give their feedback on what they might give insight as to liability when the departments are dealing with those issues. Because this is not a subject I think we can say we don't have enough people for.
Currently, Mr. Chair, Boyd Morales with the CLA. Currently, next week, you are scheduled for a special budget meeting, as we've been having every 2 weeks, and this one is carried over an extra week. And your office has requested that all city departments do appear, because those operational plans were initially due on the 24th of June. There have been some changes since then, but we are still scheduled for council chambers next Monday to go over budget by department.
Okay, now, but what, or is that the operational reports are part of that, or is that?
That was the original plan when they were due June 24th. Following that, there were some changes that happened, and we've been discussing with the CAO's office what the reports would look like from departments, because...
Well, we have to, Thursday to figure out what the agenda is going to be, because if those reports, what I would not like to do is fragment them and have two come in and we don't get a sense of what the city's going to look like after the budget.
The difficulty was the June 24th reports were done before the recent labor negotiations changed the whole scheme. In other words, there were some changes in what cuts.
We'd have to delay them to get accurate reports. We'd have to delay that, or what? Because I also would not like to have verbal stuff that we can't capture later, and then we find out verbally we didn't understand it, or they gave us something that we can't track down later.
Probably be the best recommendation, only because we can get you copies of all the operational plans that were filed on June 24th. However, they will likely not be accurate.
I think we need the best information, so we need to figure out what the timing of getting the best information for those reports, because it's important that when we send them to the council, that they understand what 10% cut means. Does it mean libraries here, or Parks and Recreation is going to do something different? And we don't want to give them misinformation that takes us off on a tangent. So we'll ask you guys to get together and figure out the timing. But whenever that timing is, risk management issues should be a part of that discussion, because that's the question we ask almost every department, but particularly those top 10 departments.
And we can carry this item over to that meeting.
Okay.
That way you can hear this report in front of the departments and then bring the issue.
We'd ask you to give some thought on how to do something more precise and more immediate during this fiscal year.
Okay. Sure thing.
So any other questions? Okay, we'll continue that item until a future committee date.
Thank you. The last item on the agenda is item 21, a CAO report relative to payment of utilities by city departments.
Good afternoon, Veronica Salumbidas with the Office of the City Administrative Officer. Your committee requested our office to report back on the payment of utilities by city departments and whether program payments by the library and the Recreation Parks departments are precedent setting. As you know, the charter requires minimum annual appropriations to the library and the Department of Recreation and Parks special funds. In addition to the charter mandated appropriation, the mayor and council may provide additional appropriation to the departments for financial supports. The two tables on page 2 of the CAO report show the amounts of additional appropriations provided by mayor and council to the two departments in the last 5 years. Also, over the years, the general fund has provided supplemental financial support to both the library and recreation and parks in the form of direct and indirect services such as water and electricity, security services, human services benefits, and fleet services. The city is not obligated to pay for these expenses. However, when resources are available, the mayor and council may opt to pay for these services, and you have done so in the past. Conversely, during periods of reduced services, the mayor and council may seek reimbursement from the two departments to pay for these costs. There is nothing in the charter that prohibits the mayor and council from seeking reimbursements from both the library and the Recreation Parks Department for these expenses.
Let me just ask, do we charge any other department in the city?
We don't, because the budget for the other council control departments are in the general fund. The budget for Recreation and Parks is in Fund 302, which is a special Recreation and Parks fund, and the budget for the library department is in Fund 300, which is the library's special funds.
But when we charge them, as we've done in this budget, and we give them no funds to cover it, what is our expectation and how they pay for it?
Well, those are, well, you could think of those as monies that the department could use for recreational purposes in the case of the Recreation and Parks, and for books for the libraries. Again, it's just a matter of, I guess, priorities.
What I'm concerned about is that if they have some charter mandated funds that go into their two departments, the expectation would be that they would be using them to service the clientele because of those primary functions. If we add that they pay for water and power with no funds, that means they're cutting back on services in those two departments.
Yeah, we actually had discussed this with the city attorney, and the city attorney actually has opined that those, the utilities are considered direct expenses or part of the operational expenses of the Department of Recreation and Parks and the library department.
I don't disagree with them. I just think it's a bookkeeping nightmare for us to give them a responsibility they can't pay for, and then have them pay for the services by cutting services that we all need in the community. And so that's what is befuddling to me, that we would tell them to pay their water and power and then tell them to pay for it out of money that we know is legitimately. And although we commingle it, it comes in and they don't get a direct allocation from the sale of our, I guess, property tax. Property tax comes in the general fund, we commingle it, we give them an allocation. So we can make a case that is general fund money in general. But the problem is, we've not given them one dime to cover those bills. And then on the other hand, we're saying, pay for it out of the services we expect you to pay.
Actually, Councilmember, there is an appropriation in the Department of Recreation and Parks budget to pay for water and electricity, but those monies are going to be transferred from the contractual services account of Recreation and Parks budget to general services. They're not going to, Recreation and Parks is not going to be paying DWP directly. The monies are going to be moved, the appropriations in Rec and Parks budget is going to be moved to the general services water and electricity fund. And just like in prior years,
That comes out of their allocation that we give them, that comes from their chartered allocation.
Yes, it's part of that.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying, when we do that, even though general services, we're laundering it quite well. We're giving it to them, we put the bill over here, they have to pay for it. But in reality, we all get less services out of libraries and Park and Rec.
Bottom line.
That is correct.
Yeah. And so the issue is it, because some of the things that we do, I understand trying to get money back in the general fund, but at some point, it would appear that when you look at your chart particularly, over 5 years, it would appear, as Mr. Smith's been saying now for 5 years, if you let these two departments run themselves on their chartered allocation, we shouldn't be putting them under any other restraint, and we shouldn't be giving them bills they can't pay for if their dollar amount that they're getting plus the fees they're getting from their operation, they could run their departments without any city support. It looks like we're adding a bill to them that actually is cutting services as opposed to funding for the bill itself.
I think part of the conundrum that we have, especially in this, past budget year and the ones upcoming, is we ask departments to generate budgetary reductions. To impose some kind of reduction at Library and Rec and Parks, this is kind of the net result. If you exempt those departments from making those budget reductions have to come somewhere else in the general fund. And it just makes the pool of general fund departments that you can take budget cuts smaller and smaller, because these are huge departments.
Yeah, they're used department, but I think the issue is they also survive because they have to create their own department revenue. They don't create their own revenue, they can't survive anyway. And so when they cut down over time, the city's appropriation from 12 million to 1.4 million, or at one time 28 million in Recreation Park down to 1.3, they've done one heck of a job of reducing the impact on the general fund just within their own resources. So that's, to see now that to complicate it by adding dollars to, say, less programming, it would appear that it's contrary to what we've asked them to do in the past, is get off the general fund dollar. But again, I don't know, it's too late in this year, but I just would not like to see these two departments treated differently, that we're adding a cost for their utilities when no other department is paying for that. And there is no department in the city, I don't think, that is coming up with revenue within their operation as these two departments are coming up with.
Can we make a motion, Mr. Parks, and say we're against this? And just
No, I think we're pretty well down the line for this year, but I think we've got to, because we're just going to create a hole somewhere.
Okay, I guess, but I'd like to add that if you want to restore the funding for both the library and the recreation parks, then that means it needs to be taken somewhere else. And for recreation and parks, it is...
For this year's budget.
Pardon me?
For this year's budget.
For this year's budget.
Next year, we could restructure.
It could be a general fund impact of anywhere between, I think for recreation and parks, it's almost $18 million. And for the library, it's about $7 to $12 million.
We may not have such a big issue next year because of the property tax. I don't know exactly where they're predicting it will be, but it's certainly not growing at the rate it used to. So their charter mandate appropriation will actually, I wouldn't say would grow significantly next budget year.
They would grow or reduce?
I think it'll be reduced next year.
So the charter mandate would drop, so that you're saying correspondingly, the city...
The requirement to provide the X amount of dollars for the charter appropriation will probably drop as well.
Because right now, it looks like they're getting, for last year, $200 million from the charter mandate. So you're saying that will drop significantly?
Not significantly, but we don't expect property tax to grow significantly, and I've heard that it may actually decrease next fiscal year.
Yes, because for this year, there's actually an increase of $10 million in the charter mandated amount, I believe from $130 to $140 million.
Let's do this, if we'll approve this report, but let's look for next fiscal year is to go down the path of looking at how these departments can manage within their charter mandated responsibilities and their department revenue, that those would determine their budget, and that the city's appropriation would be reduced to where we try to get out of the business, and that they run their budgets based on those two items. And can they survive with that, as opposed to us giving them a general fund revenue, but then in addition to that, giving them some general fund bills that they can't afford?
Yeah, let me ask you this question too. When they pay these water and power bills, do they pay sewer service charge and utility users tax as well?
The Department of Recreation and Parks and the library departments pay GSD, but I'm not familiar with how GSD pays DWP. I'm sorry, we have to get back to you. on
Let
that.
me know that, because it would seem just totally wrong for us to charge them for those taxes that we just get back in our budget someplace else again. I'm constantly amazed at the way we move money around this city. It's like a shell game, just follow the money. You can't sometimes. And it's illogical sometimes, particularly since we don't get a water revenue transfer anymore. It's just, the whole thing is crazy.
Yes, it's unnecessarily complicated.
Yeah.
Okay. But if we can look at that for next year, we'll approve the report, because we certainly don't want to create another hole somewhere. But again, as we get ready for the next year, I think that, and we have to be sensitive to what the charter mandated funds are, what their department revenue funds are. But again, our goal would be general fund appropriations would be reduced, but they live within the confines. But we don't add water and power to their bill, knowing that they have no funds to deal with it. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. With that,
Thank you.
Move that report with those instructions for next year's budget, note and file. Anything else?
That's concludes the agenda.
Thank you very much. We have no public comment cards, so we're adjourned.
It's just